I need to apologize in advance for this sermon because it is going to be both theologically and grammatically dense. Today we are going to talk about God's response to Moses when Moses asks God what God's name is. God has just given Moses his mission to bring the Israelites out of Egypt and lead them to the promised land. Moses is aware of his severe lack of credentials. So he says, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God answers Moses with a cryptic phrase that we translate into English as, I am who I am. God then says, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. For the next few minutes, I'm going to break down this cryptic response and then talk about how it impacts our lives of faith. But first, because this is a grammatical sermon, I want to talk about the word God. Over the years, you might have noticed that I do not use pronouns for God in my sermons. You have to go back to the very earliest days of my priesthood to find an instance of my calling God him in a sermon. The closest you're going to get is when I'm quoting someone else, but even then I usually massage the quote away from the pronoun. And there are two reasons I do not use pronouns when I'm talking about God. First, God is bigger than we can imagine, and applying human notions of gender to God artificially diminishes God's infinitude. While we are made in the image and likeness of God, that does not mean God has a humanoid form through which to express a gender identity. The image of God is our ability to imagine and to create. The likeness of God is our soul's eternal nature. Neither of these has to do with gender. Also, the ancient languages the Old Testament was written in handle pronouns differently than English. So when you see a default male pronoun for God in an English translation, the original language is not necessarily a masculine word. Jesus' use of the word Father in the gospel is more about relationship than gender. The Greek word in the gospel has a gender, but the Aramaic word Jesus used in his actual speech would have been more layered and complicated. Throughout Christian history, God has received a male pronoun because of patriarchal norms, not because of any deep truth of who God is. Second, I do not use pronouns for God because I consider the word God a pronoun itself. A pronoun is a word that stands in for a noun that was referenced earlier. So the way I look at it, the word God stands in for being of oneness, love, and light that is the foundation of all creation and who continues to speak creation into being and call creation back into right relationship and fulfillment. Whew. But if I abbreviated that as Bulalitfoakaktsitsibakbiraf, that's still a mouthful. You can see it in my screen right there. See? So I say God, knowing that my use of the word God is standing in for something beyond my ability to comprehend that sustains my being. So that's why I call God, God, and don't use English pronouns. All right, let's get back to Moses. And I'm going to use the flip chart now, after I get some water. I've been talking since 7:45 this morning. Okay, flip chart time. All right, getting back to Moses. God says God's name is I am who I am. Okay. This name is really a construction of the basic verb to be, right? This is why English is hard for non-native English speakers. All right, what do we have here? What's that? That is the first person singular of this word. Huh? Right? So if we made this plural and it's we, what would go here? We are, right? I heard a teacher over there say it. We are, he, she, or it is, right? So you have, what we're doing here is the conjugation of the verb to be in English, right? So I am is a form of the verb to be. Everybody with me so far? My kids were at the early service and they were like, this is what we're doing in class right now. It's like, yes, okay. They're not using God's name to do it, they're just doing this. Okay. So, this name is really a construction of the basic verb to be. And in Hebrew, it has the added benefit of sounding like an exhale when you say it out loud. Chaya, that's the Hebrew, sort of. So God's name is intimately tied to breath and to our being. The word being is interesting because it is the verb to be followed by the continuous tense suffix ing, right? Added to it. There we go. So, a being, look at this. Isn't that cool? Being. We're making our be continuous. Being. So a being is something whose living essence continues. As the foundation of all being, God is the genesis of all there is and the ultimate source of our being. So when God says, I am who I am, we could also translate that name as, I create what I create. God's name then communicates that God is the creator and sustainer of all that is. Okay, in addition, the name I am is the absolute shortest a complete sentence can be in our language, right? Let's diagram this sentence. Remember doing this in school? So this right here is the shortest a sentence in English can be. We have what? Subject, verb, or predicate, right? Subject, verb, I am. Literally the shortest sentence in English that English can have. Okay, this is the fundamental sentence upon which the rest of our language system rests. Likewise, God is the fundamental being from which all subsidiary being springs. When you feel fully awake and alive, you are connecting more deeply with this fundamental being, which is the source of aliveness. In the Gospel according to John, Jesus demonstrates his own connection with God by quoting God's name over and over again. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. I am, I am, I am. He says it about somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 times in the gospel, something like that. Don't correct me on that, internet. A lot. He says it a lot. The writers of the gospel consciously link Jesus' divine identity back to the identity God shares with Moses at the burning bush. Jesus is the divine I am, okay? And Jesus is the human I am. Maybe we write that one lowercase. Okay? At the same time. 100% of both, with neither subsuming or diminishing the other. Okay. I told you this sermon was going to be full of theology and grammar. Again, I'm sorry. As we turn toward the end of the sermon, we reach the so what question. What does all this have to do with us as followers of Jesus? Recognizing that our being, our essence or spark or soul springs from the foundation of all being that we call God, recognizing this truth comes with some responsibilities. For one, we embrace the revelation that all of creation, not just us humans, derives its existence and its sustenance from the God who said, "Let there be light." And so the revelation of God's name is also the call to our mission to protect and nurture the integrity of our precious environment. Second, recognizing our own being is contingent on recognizing the being of other humans. God is the foundation of all being, which includes you and me. So when I claim my own being, I must also accept your being. This is the awakening of dignity, the fundamental recognition of personhood, or what we might call belovedness. Third, the fact that God's name is essentially a verb reminds us that our faith in God is active and kinetic. Faith is not something we have, faith is something we do. Rather than being a prerequisite for a proverbial faith journey, faith happens when we walk the way with God. As one of my favorite spiritual writers, Brian McLaren, says, we make the road by walking. Okay, that's enough theology and grammar for one day. In the end, remember that God is the foundation of all being, the soil from which our trees' roots grow. We have our being because God continues to speak our existence into reality. And the good news is this: from the first moment when God spoke light into being, God has never stopped speaking. Amen.